Hello and welcome. I am Ben the Best 5 coming at you with yet another video for Kerbal Space Program, and you might notice that this video is a bit different because I am in fact jumping straight into the action and launching a rocket without a proper intro. However, that's okay because, hey, it doesn't matter. Anyway, for this particular mission, you might recognize this rocket because it's the one that we used for our payload for the orbital bombardment special. However, this time we're using it for a different payload. We are in fact launching a space station core because we have in fact received our first mission, which as well requires a rendezvous. This mission is specifically to just rendezvous two vehicles, and what better to do that with than a space station core, which will eventually be built upon to actually build a proper space station when I am tasked with doing that. So with this mission here, I am in fact setting up a space station for later uses in later missions, and I am also going to be setting up a second craft to rendezvous with it. Now for this mission I'm in fact using the solid rocket booster configuration which a solid rocket booster based rocket uses, just simply because that is a lot cheaper. Even with recovery, it saves tens of thousands of funds by expelling solid rocket boosters than trying to recover them, just because the fuel is cheaper and you get literally nothing except like a few $100s worth in like metal value, I guess, from the actual solid rocket motor tubes. Plus solid rocket boosters are incredibly cheap to start with, so if they do have a problem, then you don't lose much by them failing at all. Now for this mission I in fact forgot to assign action groups to my solar panels, so I am in fact going to have to manually do that. However, that's fine, shouldn't be an issue. Now for this particular mission we are going to be aiming for about a 200-kilometer orbit with our space station, just because 200 kilometers is a pretty good height for a space station, because if it's too high then you end up wasting too much delta V to actually get to it. However, if it's too low then you end up spending a lot of, then rendezvousing with it can be quite difficult. Just simply because there's not a lot of space below it. For example, if I went for a 100-kilometer orbit for my station, then there's only about 30 kilometers below I can go before I start hitting the atmosphere, which really cuts off a whole lot of options for rendezvous. However, if I go for a 200-kilometer orbit, then there's suddenly a 130-kilometer error margin, or space where I can use to go into a lower orbit than our target to help us rendezvous, which makes the process a lot easier and a lot less prone to errors, which is why I'm going for an apoapsis here of as close to 200 as possible, so that we can in fact come along here and raise our periapsis to about 200, so that we have a roughly 200 by 200 kilometer orbit, which will be nice and ideal for our station core. Also, this craft does have a probe core on both the upper stage to control it, as well as the lower stage, which, well, the payload has a probe core as well as the upper stage, so that when the payload is successfully in the orbit which we are wanting, then we can go ahead and deorbit the stage to limit the amount of debris which is in orbit. Because although debris probably won't cause an issue, it can still cause an issue. And the thing is about space debris is all the stuff in orbit of Kerbin is moving at 2 kilometers per second, which is incredibly fast. So if any two objects do collide, even if it's only a small collision, it can have catastrophic results. Which is why we in fact like to deorbit used stages. So here we are in a roughly 200 kilometer orbit with our rocket here, so we are going to in fact come along here and undock it and let our basic space station core deorbit, and now we're just going to wait till the lower stage is pointing away from the payload so that we don't end up destroying it when we turn our engine on, at which point we can then throttle up, turn our engine on to get nice and clear of it, and then we can point retrograde and deorbit and destroy the booster. So now that we are clear, we can just come along here and point retrograde, kill off all of our velocity, or at least enough of it that we will in fact have a periapsis in the surface of Kerbin, and we can now leave this because it will just eventually crash into the surface of Kerbin and be no more and not have to worry us ever again. Alright, and here we are with our vehicle, which is now going to rendezvous with the station. Now the vehicle which we will rendezvous with is a rather simple, it's basically just a capsule with some fuel in it to help us make our way to the station. Now it does have a docking port, you can see there. However, we will not be using it to dock because that will come in a later mission. And well, what's the point in doing it now when we can do it later for some extra funds? This is just a test mission to prove the capacities of rendezvousing, and docking stuff and building stations will come later. Basically, I'm just using it to test the nose cone there to make sure that I can have a detachable nose cone which will work nicely, specifically given the possible situations with heating and stuff like that. However, as we can see here, it works perfectly fine. Now we have a bit of an apoapsis issue, I guess you could say, where our apoapsis is a lot higher than the target's apoapsis. However, this might not be an issue just because we're trying to rendezvous with it, and sometimes having a much higher orbit than your target can sometimes be quite useful, because it means you can let your target catch up to you very quickly and very efficiently. So yes, we can in fact get a maneuver fairly easily, especially if we end up in a bit of a higher orbit. So I'm going to go for a orbit, roughly intersecting that of the target, and then from there I'm going to go ahead and perform some basic maneuver burns to get us on a rendezvous. Right, we have safely inserted ourselves into an orbit around Kerbin, and now we want to make our next burn at the ascending node or descending node, whichever one comes first, so that we can in fact align the two orbits so that they're on the same inclination. Now the orbits are relatively similar in inclination, as in they're almost perfect, but even just being off by a couple of degrees means that the two targets will in fact miss each other by potentially kilometers, just because although it's not a great amount, it's still quite a lot considering how big a planet is. And because both of our crafts are on an equatorial plane and we launch from an equatorial plane, burning to get to an equatorial or the same orientation will be relatively cheap, because basically when they're launched they both didn't get to quite perfectly equatorial orbits. However, they both got so incredibly close that they're almost in equatorial orbits, which means that any adjustment will be small. So now they are both on, well, as far as Kerbal Space Program's calculations will tell me, we are on the same orbital plane, which means we now want to go ahead and fiddle around with either increasing or decreasing our orbit until we get two intersect nodes which are on top of each other. Skipping orbits is also sometimes very helpful. So for example, here we have a rather close intersect now, so I'm just going to fiddle with the maneuver node until, see, half a kilometer. That's very close and a very nice intersect. So we are going to go and time warp around to that location, and when we are there we just want to follow the maneuver node until our burn is complete, at which point we will be ready to intersect and then kill off our velocity when we get near it, so that we can then perform a rendezvous. Again, this burn isn't going to be very long, so instead of burning at full throttle, I'm going to be burning at part throttle, and I did that for the previous burn, I just didn't mention it. And burning at part throttle just means that we can get more precision while burning. Now we overshot a little bit, however, we can probably undo that just a bit by quickly doing a small retrograde burn, because we burned prograde to get there, so we overshot, so if we burn retrograde it will in fact basically undo that. And now we can go ahead and time warp to about here, because that's going to be where our two crafts are going to be nice and close to each other. So here we are, they are less than 10 kilometers already, and now we want our target velocity on, and we want to face retrograde, so that we are going to kill off our speed relative to our target, which is important because that's the process you take to rendezvous. Now we've got to wait till they are fairly close, because when we burn, that's how close they're going to be together. So that's nice and close. I think I've overshot just a bit, but she's looking pretty good. There we go. These two crafts are now in basically the same orbit and moving very slowly relative to each other, which is what qualifies as the definition of a rendezvous. So now we have performed our rendezvous test to prove that we can rendezvous. We can go ahead now and deorbit this craft. So we do that just by burning prograde and then burning until our periapsis is inside Kerbin. And then once that is successfully done, we just let our craft fall inside the atmosphere, and we let our service bay burn up. However, we make it so that our capsule, which has our Kerbals stowed in it, can drop safely to the ground by using things like its heat shield to absorb the heat and stopping the capsule from overheating, which keeps our Kerbals nice and safe inside the capsule, even if it does get a bit toasty. And you'll see here that I in fact put all 3 parachutes on the other side. There is literally no reason for doing this, except that kind of makes it look cool and fall down kind of slantedly, and also means that the Kerbals can in fact see out the front windows, which they couldn't previously do. They couldn't previously do that because they were in fact blocked by parachutes, but now they can see out those front windows, which is pretty cool for the Kerbals, and now the capsule falls down kind of SpaceX style, which is always pretty cool and nice to note, and one of the reasons I did it. Alright, we have splashed down, so we can now rescue our brave Kerbals and bring them back home to the Kerbal Space Center after a successful rendezvous mission. So yes, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, then please leave a like. If you would like to see more of this content, then please subscribe, and you'll see more in weekly installments. If you'd like to let me know anything, please comment. Other than that, thank you for watching, and goodbye.